Thank you for choosing Minority Alliance Organization meeting today. This week, we kind of want to discuss our current judicial system, especially focusing on the story that came across this week of Mr. Eric Riddick and kind of a few flaws within our judicial system. And kind of the first thing I want to ask, Mark, is um, how do you feel like this current judicial system has become kind of like a business more so than what its true original use case was supposed to be in seeing true justice.
When you're a CEO of any type of business, you only have one job. That is make money. That's it. There is no other job. I don't care if you are the CEO of a restaurant chain, hotel chain, for a private college, an administrator for a hospital, whatever it is. You're the CEO. Build a brand, build the money. That's your job. So when it comes to private prisons, you know, it's still a business, and there is no business is not good if people are not in those beds, in those cells, and there isn't a fresh set coming in. If anybody gets out of lowering the standards of what puts somebody in a place like that, there is no profit to be made there. So as long as that's the case, and as long as that money finds its way into the coffers of politicians as well, it continues that cycle going on and on and on. And in the case, 31 years. I mean, that's 1990 that this man, 1990 to 2021. That's what this man committed. And you clearly don't have the evidence that this man committed a crime, or this man committed the crime that you convicted him of and that you put him in prison for. But at the same time, appeal after appeal after appeal didn't, it turned up nothing. It turned up nothing. And, you had these court appointed attorneys who, as you said, their job is not to get you out of prison. Their job is not to, find the holes and poke holes in the evidence and make the state prove their case and, exploit the areas where they didn't make their case. No, their job is to end this case as quickly as possible. And many people, that's plea. And if you look at the amount, you look at the percentages of people who get who plead out when they have a court-appointed attorney versus the number of pleas that you get when a person has had the ability to pay for an attorney, especially one an attorney who is highly respected, who also by proxy costs a lot more. You're going to see a gigantic stark difference in there, and so just to kick it back over to you, when you think about this system and the way that it is, of course, we must have a criminal justice system, but can we even consider this at this point when you look at this man's case, a criminal justice system?
I mean, and as we kind of discussed before starting today, I don't think that there's no easy way to totally go in and fix the issue. I mean, at the end of the day, as you said, this is a person that served 31 years, and then not only did they take that much of his life, they still left him with a conviction, just a lesser conviction, and set him free instead of totally adjudicating his case. So, I mean, I think there has to be a ton of different things implemented, especially when we're looking within the minority community and at the different rate at which minorities, 9 times out of 10, end up with a court-appointed lawyer versus a paid lawyer due to the economical status.
I mean, I think that it could be a situation where the type of thing where there's like an automatic review on a national scale for disputed cases like this. Now, granted, there would be tons and tons and tons of disputed cases. There would be very, very few cases that weren't disputed unless a person, straight up just, confessed that they did it, or there was overwhelming evidence for that. But I do think that there's other things that can be done to kind of mitigate that, because that would be a tremendous cost to the federal government in that regard. I would say that I know we talked about outsourcing a little bit. I think one of the things that we could look at also is outsourcing the appeals process. If you are convicted of a crime in Alabama and there's a lot of flimsy evidence, and there's things that you want to, there's things you're trying to appeal, there's things that you're trying to get out there, evidence that may be exculpatory that you may not have done this, and they're not going to listen to your evidence, then there should be a mechanism in place where that appeal is not heard by the state of Alabama. They've made their decision. They have their they've rendered a decision. That decision comes with an implicit bias. The implicit bias is that you are a convicted criminal. So by outsourcing that appeal to another state and having them, take the case, and they take the case raw, and they take the case raw with the evidence that is presented, and the evidence that is being put forth by both plaintiff and defense, you may have a better chance of having that fresh set of eyes look at that. But wait a minute, that person has no business in jail right now. That person has no business in prison right now, or we need to have a new trial because there's too many things up in the air to legally uphold this conviction. I think that there needs to be something, like that, where you have oversight always is going to trump corruption, as long as that oversight, is random and public. We need to have the type of oversight over things. When we talk about reform, for police, and that's where a lot of this stuff mentally just tends to go, because we see those headlines and we, equate it to those, to those specific circumstances. But when we look at a case like this, we look at all the other people who were convicted, and it only was because Meek Mills was in jail on some dubious stuff that he ran across this gentleman who was in prison for 3 decades on some dubious stuff that even started this ball rolling. So when we talk about reform and this systematic reform, again, we need the system. It's the bottom to the top, and there's so many different things involved in there. And this is just another branch of that poisonous tree, where you have a system where the bond system, for example, is an economic system. People don't think of it as an economic system, but it's an economic standard to criminal justice. You have court-appointed attorneys, which again is an economic standard brought to criminal justice. We have conviction rates that people tend to track when it comes to elections for attorneys generals, for district attorneys, and all these things kind of collide and come together, and all of those circumstances are only going to run over one type of person, and that is a poor minority. And it's going to happen over and over and over again, and that is why we see our prison system so completely overwhelmed with poor minorities. That's kind of the system that's been set up to do. So I think if you're going to attack that and you're going to change that, we need to completely reimagine how the whole thing is done, not just in ending the privatization of prisons, not just not building anymore, which is what the Biden administration is talking about, but we need to look at downsizing what exists. And we need to rethink how these things are done. And we also need to rethink the oversight of appeals process, oversight of the bond system, oversight of court-appointed attorney system, and how those cases are put together, and how they're put together versus how paid lawyers, how paid defense attorneys cases are put together. All of it. It needs a systematic reform to deal with a systematic problem.
Yes, sir. And even still focusing kind of on Mr. Eric Riddick's case, you see a situation where, looking at the system, there are a ton of minority men who end up having to take plea deals because, especially dealing with court-appointed lawyers and things of that nature, they'll tell them, I don't know if I could totally win if we go to trial, or 9 times out of 10, they, use the fear factor of if they went to trial, they would probably lose and get more time. So a lot of young minority men end up copping out to a lot of these plea deals. And I think there needs to be something looked at within that range of how many, just look at the numbers across the whole country of how many minority men are dealing with prior or even current convictions due to these issues. And then after you take a plea deal with the current way that the law is set up, you actually can't even appeal your case or anything of that nature. So you're kind of stuck with that conviction. And, there are tons of people who for their life will have to deal with these issues and not be able to go back in and appeal their situation to have the same opportunity that granted Mr. Eric Riddick spent 31 years waiting for, but they won't ever even have that opportunity, period.
Yeah, absolutely. Over and over and over again, we see these devil's bargains that people are stuck with. Where, as in the case of Mr. Riddick here, with Eric Riddick, he was even with this, even with them finding, with them being able to present extra evidence and things like that, he was still given a devil's bargain where you could either after 31 years take a lesser charge and we let you out on time served, or you can continue to sit here while you continue to appeal your case, and maybe that works and maybe it doesn't. But either way, you stay in prison. So even then, it's still not about innocence or guilt. It's not about whether or not he actually did not do this. It's not about whether you actually have an innocent man behind bars and have had them there for the better part of 3 decades. It's about, keeping a person in the system. There is no other explanation for telling someone who has presented evidence, exculpatory evidence, that they didn't do something, and telling them that your choice is get out on a lesser charge and time served, or continue to try and prove your innocence while you continue to sit in a cell. There is no justice there.
Do you think overall that has something to do with the fact of the state having to look at monetary penalties for not letting him out with some conviction after 31 years?
Oh, again, the answer to the question of almost every question in America is money, right? There's very few questions that you can ask in how minorities are dealt with that is not going to lead back to cash somewhere. So again, this man gets out. Turns out he was innocent all along. Turns out he denied appeals for no reason. Turns out that he spent 31 years on a crime he didn't convict. Someone's going to end up coming out of some money. So that's a problem for the state. These prisons, are, you don't make any money. It's just like you think about it in the same terms as you think of a hotel. What's the most expensive thing in a hotel? An empty bed, because you're not making any money, right? So it's the exact same thing when it comes to these privatized prisons and the way that the prison system is set up. So there is no money to be made by completely exonerating this man and him ending up with some sort of compensation for the fact that a lifetime of time has been taken away from him. And, besides the physical time that we're talking about the mental strain. 1990 to 2021, okay, the internet wasn't a thing when that man went into prison. There was no such thing as a self-checkout in a grocery store. Like, this man has no idea how the world even works. Okay, LeBron James was 5 years old when that man went into prison. Okay, and so this is the sort of this sort of damage can't just be backed up. And over and over and over again, we see these things, and it's just, the difficult part of this is that we're not understanding it, and it's not being treated with the respect that it deserves. This is as much of an epidemic on the minority community as anything else that has been done. We have seen and witnessed, and it is undisputable facts that, crack was introduced into neighborhoods to help fund wars, and that minorities paid the price for that, and that private prisons became a multi-billion-dollar a year industry, and that minority communities paid the price for that. And so, for even in this situation here, minorities continue to pay the price for this, and we recognize that there's a systematic issue. But when we look at the reform, we're looking at the reform in piecemeal. We're looking at it in pieces and in specific cases and things like that. And we're not taking a step back and realizing that this is a heavily crafted system all the way up from the bottom to the top. And that the first thing that we need to do in order to attack this is attack the credibility and attack the money, because the money is what it's all about. So the money is the first place where the system can be disrupted. And that's where everybody needs to kind of look when it comes to how do you stop this? How do you deal with this? How do you, make this? How do you get justice for a person like this? Well, first thing is to try and make sure that it doesn't happen to any other people. There's no other way to do that, and we have to attack like how we got here. How did we got to the point where he went to prison? Those are the things that you're bringing up with court-appointed attorneys and conviction rates and the way these things are done and the way appeals are handled.
Yeah, I mean, kind of wrapping on that end of the day, I think that whole judicial system needs to be looked at, as you said, overall, because currently it's a system of people basically becoming numbers and being cattle, in a sense. And that's how, as you said, these private prisons and things of that nature are making money off of people in the long run. And it's just, it was a tough story to hear. That's why we kind of wanted to discuss it this week. To see someone have that much of their life, sucked away, and it be over because the system basically failed them. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Basically, the system failed him from the get-go, and is continuing to fail him even after he has been freed from the system. So, that's definitely something that we want to see attacked. And I mean, when we're speaking on people protesting last year and people come out and protest the factor of police brutality, but forget these other sides of the issue that are currently still affecting minority communities all over the country. These are things that we got to most definitely continue to keep an eye on and continue to push for reform and policy change within those areas. I know you kind of wanted to speak on with us passing the anniversary of the Tulsa massacre and things of that nature. Kind of speak on the Black Wall Street and things of that nature during that time period, and how that has kind of been a ripple effect into still the current standing of a lot of minorities economically within society.
Yeah, so there's a few things that I wanted to touch on with this, and starting off, we are coming up on the anniversary. I believe it's Tuesday of the Tulsa. They called it a Tulsa race riot, which is kind of a really interesting way to wrap up what is probably still to this day the largest act of domestic terrorism that's ever been, what's ever been performed on this country's soil. So, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, they had what was known as Black Wall Street. It was a neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where there were many, many black businesses. It was a thing that we talk about all the time, where you had black owned businesses. Those were people who, ran areas, and it was, all black owned. It was gas stations, it was, grocery stores, it was apartment buildings. They owned land. There was all sorts of different things that were going on over there, and there was an economic power structure for a black community in an American city in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And you know it was attacked. It was attacked by a group of white people. It was attacked by a group of white supremacists who, obviously, for obvious reasons, in 1921, did not appreciate this and wanted to do something about it. And they set many fires. They set off explosives. It is still the only time in this country's history where an American actually used an airplane to bomb another American, because they actually used planes and dropped bombs on buildings. And there were some World War One veterans, some Black World War One veterans, who took up arms and tried to defend the neighborhoods, but they were outgunned and overmatched, and well over 300 Black people died during this time. And that financial area never recovered from that, and never recovered to this day from that. And even to this day, where I saw that that Biden was planning on going to Tulsa, Oklahoma on Tuesday to commemorate this and talk about it, and that there's already a warning by the FBI that there may be some people planning some stuff on that day, out there. And when you look at stuff like that, these things get swept under the rug. And they get swept under the rug so heavily through language and through the way that these things are framed, in our media. And it was framed then as a race riot. Race riot sounds like it was participation on both sides. It wasn't. That was an attack. Even now, when we talk about, the need for people to more and more talk about these things and actually talk about the legitimate history of this country, They put a name to it called critical race theory. And critical race theory, in a vacuum sounds scary. And to some of these people, it is scary. But it's just history. Not there is no country that doesn't have blood on its hands, and America is no different. But what's supposed to be different about this country is the fact that we're supposed to be able to, despite our mistakes and despite our issues, be able to move past these things so that we can, get through it and people can actually be a part of the American system. We keep selling that to other people. But for us as minorities, for us as African Americans, we still go through this. It's still going today. And we're still not recovered. We still don't have the financial foothold that we could or that we should. We still don't have the openness of the opportunity to build something like that. And that was more or less about sending a message as opposed to actually destroying some buildings. So, when I talk about these things and I bring these things out to the table, it's not just a grim reminder of something bad that happened. It's a reminder that there's a continuation of this. This still goes on today. It's changed faces and it's changed, the appearance and how it was. It wasn't as blatant as flying a plane and dropping bombs on buildings, but we're not far from that. There are still things in place that are, that people go out of their way to, to make us look like the threat and to make us look like the enemy, to keep those type of opportunities down, to keep home ownership, business ownership down, to keep the ability to get that type of financial freedom to where you do not need someone else's system because you can actually build one of your own, and to keep that down. So I wanted to highlight that for a second, and obviously I'll kick it over to you to get your thoughts, but I wanted to, definitely highlight that because this is a very, very grim milestone in our country's history that is almost an afterthought, and I don't think that that's fair at all. It needs to be out there, it needs to be talked about, because I can tell you this: if there were ever a situation where a white town and a white financial district were completely destroyed with over 300 deaths because another race didn't like what they were doing, I guarantee you, well, I think we had that. I believe we call it Pearl Harbor. And we still talk about that. And that helped, and that ushered our entire country into a war. So, that may not be a specific apples to apples comparison, but I believe you get my drift on that.
Yes, sir. And I mean, more so for me, with kind of putting an eye on the anniversary and everything that happened there, looking at it in economical sense, that's something we haven't been able to recreate or accomplish anywhere in the country since then. And as you said, these are constant things that we are pushing policy for, and uh, that we actually have many topics across the channel speaking on ways that we can recreate, hopefully something that can mirror, if even somewhat, what they were creating at that time period. And I think it's something that a lot more people should do their true diligent research deeper into the situation that occurred and into that time period and what people were building in that area at that time, and what minorities were trying to achieve with building that city at that time, and the message that they were giving out to the rest of the country. I mean, as we say all the time, we look at many other races within our own country. You even have people who come from other countries and come here and are able to come together and build communities and areas. They mirror themselves and continue to keep, as you said, you'll have Asian districts where they have stores that they own, banks that they own, restaurants that they own, and everything within that area. And we've yet to see that, especially when you're looking within the African American community for that same situation where there are banks, restaurants, gas stations, and businesses within the area owned by African Americans.
Yeah. So there are a couple of things that are different about what we see with some of these other communities and what we see with our own. Number one, unfortunately, you know, it has to be said that when messages like that get sent, those messages end up unfortunately being received. And we've seen that in many, many instances, especially in the South, where, people gone and they sent messages when people, wanted something better and they wanted something different or they wanted to change the system or at least just get their part of the system for themselves and their family. Messages were sent and messages were received. We still see that to this day. And so, unfortunately, in that regard, it kind of was that way. Secondly, it's something that you and I talked about, I believe it was either last week or a week before, we talked about how the indoctrination to looking out for yourself and that sort of system of personal self-aggrandizing greed, that message has been sent by, the American system for a really long time. It resides in the psyche no harder than it does in the African American community. There's a sense of self where people just aren't going to put in to take care of one another. Or when you're trying to build something in a community, there are people who don't have that respect for that in the community. There are people who would rob, that establishment or burn that establishment or take something, beautiful that someone's trying to build and not respect it because there's kind of a mental self, I need to be about me kind of thing going on there that you don't see in these other communities because they're not as indoctrinated. And then the third part is just there is simply, it's starting to happen more and more with Hispanics over the last few years, but there is no minority that is outwardly seen as a threat on a personal level, person to person, as it is an African American. Overall, yes, there are people who would think of Muslims as a threat, Middle Eastern people as a threat, but nobody is seen like you or I just walking into a room, just walking into a store, is walking past a police officer. Immediately, the mind goes to threat over and over and over again. So, as we say, unfortunately, several times, almost several times, per cast, that this is a system. And from the bottom to the top, the whole system, all the way down to its bones, is set up for us to be the others, for us to be the bad guys, and therefore we don't get these things. And as a people, we have the buying power, we have the combined financial might to build whatever we want to do if we simply have the will behind it to do so. And so every now and again, it needs to be said. It needs to be said out loud because we never know who's hearing this, and we never know who's talking about it. And if there are investors out there, and if there are people out there, anyone who has that the sort of money and the will to do so and the desire to do so, we put things together. It can't be taken from us. We're in an information age now where we can keep that stuff out there and we can keep it, but it's getting that first step going and having even the type of ethnic confidence, for lack of a better term, the ethnic confidence that we even can to start this thing up and to get what we're looking for. There's so many people who tried over the years and are pushed over the years, and people marvel looking at what some of the things that Akon is doing over there in Africa, going, man, why couldn't we have something like that here? It's like, well, you know what? You can. At any time, we can. We just have to have the will behind it and be willing to put it down and face down these threats to us, to us and to our own prosperity.
Yes, sir. And as I stated before, it's definitely our push for more people to actually delve into the situation that did occur and kind of have a remembrance this week following Memorial Day on Tuesday. Take the time to kind of remember the people that did lose their lives in that situation and what they were fighting for within that city, and kind of, keep that mentality and hold on to that and continue to fight for these things in today's age and continue to push for change and just equality across the board in these issues, especially as we kind of discussed last week. When looking at the African American community, I think more African Americans need to kind of build kind of that mentality of where we can truly work together and build kind of these economical hub communities around the country. And as I said, to be able to mirror truly what they were creating in Tulsa, Oklahoma at the time.